So you've seen Honor Among Thieves, or perhaps you've been playing some Baldur's Gate 3. Perhaps you've watched a couple of episodes of Vox Machina or Stranger Things, and now you're thinking to yourself, maybe I want to give this Dungeons & Dragons thing a try. But is it for you? And if so, how do you get started? Welcome everyone, I'm Nazir North, and in this video I'm going to run through the basics of how you can start playing Dungeons & Dragons. I'm going to cover the fundamentals of the game and how it works. We're going to talk about what you need to get started. Plus, if you have access to the internet, which you probably do if you're watching this video on YouTube, then I'm going to tell you how you can start playing for free without spending a single penny, which you might want to try before you dish out a load of money on expensive books, dice sets or miniatures. And throughout the video I'm going to explain all of the Dungeons & Dragons acronyms and jargon that you might see as you learn more about the game. Starting off with part 1, what is Dungeons & Dragons, or D&D for short? D&D is a tabletop role-playing game, sometimes referred to as a TTRPG. If you play video games, you've probably come across the term RPG before, as in role-playing game. It includes things like Skyrim, Fable, Dragon Age, Fallout and The Witcher. What makes these games role-playing games is that the player is in control of the character's choices. They aren't like games like Call of Duty or Halo where you're pretty much just following a predetermined path. RPG games generally give you the freedom to do whatever you want within the mechanics and limits of the game. And when it comes to RPGs, Dungeons & Dragons, originally released in 1974, is the grandfather of them all. All modern video game RPGs are essentially just trying to replicate that original D&D tabletop experience just on a screen. So if you like video game RPGs, the chances are you will like Dungeons & Dragons. Now, you've probably already got an image in your head of how the game works. Some people moving little figures around a board, rolling funny shaped dice and getting very excited. But what's actually going on? In D&D, you have a number of players, usually around 3 to 6, and then you have one person who plays as the Dungeon Master. The Dungeon Master, or DM, is also sometimes called the Game Master, or GM. But either way, their role is the same. Think of the Dungeon Master as part narrator and part referee. Their job is to guide the players through the game and make judgment calls on the rules. While each player controls a single character that they have made themselves, like a barbarian, a wizard, or a ranger, the Dungeon Master instead controls the monsters. So when there is a fight, each player controls their individual character, and then the Dungeon Master controls the bad guys. Maybe some zombies, a grizzly bear, or even a dragon. Whether you are fighting in combat or doing anything else in the game, the sequence of events is usually a little something like this. The DM presents a scenario. For example, you are travelling down a quiet road through the countryside and it starts to get dark. What would you like to do? The players then confer and decide, well, shall we press on? Find somewhere to make camp for the night? Maybe turn back to that village we passed an hour ago and look for an inn. Whatever they decide, the DM then describes what happens next. It's almost like an interactive story. When something happens that requires some effort on the part of the player's characters, let's say they want to swing a sword at a troll or climb up a steep ravine, that's when we roll the dice. I'm not going to get into anything too technical on game rules in this video, but generally the player will roll this. This is called a d20, which is a 20-sided die, and the higher you roll, usually the better the result. And for most rolls, you will get to add a bonus to the result as well. Let's say you are a muscular warrior, you might have a +3 bonus to your strength. So even if you only rolled a 10 on the d20, you get to add +3, which gives you a 13, so it's a little bit better. This is meant to reflect how some players' characters are better at certain activities than others. That covers very briefly the basics of gameplay, but how long does it take? You might have heard stories from friends or co-workers who have played D&D talking about games that last for a year or more. Is that true? Well, much like a TV show being split into episodes and seasons, a Dungeons & Dragons game is split into sessions and campaigns. In one play session, say a Sunday afternoon, you may play for around 3 or 4 hours, maybe more, maybe less. And in that time you might have done some exploration in the wilderness, some investigation around town, and probably getting involved in 2 or 3 combat encounters. That usually means fighting a monster. How often D&D groups can meet will depend on the individuals playing. Some groups play on the same day every week, while some groups can only manage to play once a month. Regular players will often joke that organising people's schedules to arrange a game session is actually more difficult than fighting any monster in D&D. Finding a time that suits everyone can be difficult. Multiple play sessions are then strung together in a campaign. A campaign could last for 10 sessions or it could last for 100, it'll depend on the campaign itself and the dungeon master who's running it. Throughout the campaign, the players will usually play as the same character for the whole thing, unless their character dies and they need to create a new one, which does happen now and then. You can start to see how some players get very attached to their characters as they may have been playing with them for several months or longer. Assuming the players' characters stay alive, as the campaign goes on, they will get stronger and become more powerful, collecting money from completed quests to buy better gear and equipment, and also leveling up, giving them access to new skills and new abilities. As a side note here on our acronyms, player characters are sometimes referred to as PCs, while characters that Dungeon Master controls are called NPCs, as in non-player characters. Collectively, the group of player characters is usually called the Adventuring Party or just the Party. Alright, let's move on to part 2 of the video. What do you need in order to play? There are a few essential things you will need access to, but as we'll get to shortly, you can actually get all of these things for free online. You can try the game out without actually spending any money to see if you like it first before you make that bigger investment. You are going to need a set of the rules. Now, I won't lie, the rules for Dungeons & Dragons can be a little daunting at first. It's not going to be like playing Risk or Monopoly where you can just flick through a short rules booklet. D&D is far more in-depth than any board game or video game you've played. D&D is a complicated game with a fairly high barrier to entry, but that's the trade-off for the unique and immersive experience that you get from D&D that you're never going to find in a video game. So where can you find the rules? If you are a player in the game, so just controlling one character that you are going to make yourself, then the only book you need is this one, the Player's Handbook, often abbreviated as the PHB. If you are the Dungeon Master of a group, then you will also need the Dungeon Master's Guide, or the DMG, which has more of the advanced rules for setting up and running the game, and then also the Monster Manual, which, like it says on the tin, is a compendium of different monsters you can throw against the players. But hang on, these books are about 30 or 40 quid each. I thought you said we could play for free. This is where something called the Basic Rules comes in. This is a free PDF that you can access online and is an official D&D publication. I'll add the link to the description. The basic rules are by no means as detailed as the 3 core rulebooks that we mentioned, the Player's Handbook, Dungeon Master's Guide and the Monster Manual, but the basic rules do contain everything you need to actually start playing D&D. Even though it has basic in the title, this PDF is still almost 200 pages long, but don't worry, you don't have to read the whole thing. There's a short introduction, there's a chapter on making your character, but you only need to skim through and check the parts that are relevant to you. There are the core rules, which span over about 20 pages. It's a little longer if your character has spells, but if you are a rogue or a fighter class, then you probably don't need to worry about this part. And that's it if you're a player. If you are the Dungeon Master in the game, there is a bit more you'll need to be familiar with as well. The essential parts here are how to use monsters and how to run combat encounters. Overall, when you break it down, it's not that much. As a player, you can learn everything you need to about the rules and build your own character in about an hour. And when it comes to building your character, the basic rules conveniently have a character sheet template at the end of the document, which you can print out and fill in as you go. I'll also include the link to the electronic editable character sheets as well in the video description. Okay, so rules covered, what else do you need to get started? A set of polyhedral dice. You can order dice sets fairly cheaply online and pick them up from almost any local gaming shop. In a standard set of D&D dice, you should have 7 in total: a D4, D6, D8, D10, D12, D100, and the most important one, the D20. But if you don't have physical dice, not to worry, because if you type into Google roll D20 or any of those die sizes, you get a little virtual dice tray that you can just use right there in browser, completely free. The next thing you need is pen and paper. There are going to be a lot of things you'll want to write down as you play the game. Maybe the name of the town you need to visit next, or the name of the important NPC that gave you that quest. But equally, you could record these things in a notes app on your smartphone or tablet. For combat encounters, you will most likely want a grid to play on. You can do this by printing out a grid or just drawing 1-inch squares on some paper with a ruler. If you are playing online on a virtual tabletop or VTT, something like Roll20 or Foundry, then you don't actually need any of this, as those applications will provide an electronic battlefield and they usually have some kind of built-in dice roller. VTTs are mainly used for groups who play with each other online as opposed to in person at a physical table. For those of you who are planning on playing in person, let's talk about miniatures, or minis for short. Even if you've never played D&D, you've probably at least seen images like this, with small people and creatures painted up and fighting on a table. But you do not need minis to play D&D. Some people really enjoy collecting and painting minis as a hobby, but they can be quite pricey, and for casual players they're completely optional. All you need are some items to use as tokens on your battle grid. You can just use coins or borrow tokens from other games like Monopoly. If you have any, you could even use Lego figures or Lego pieces. And last thing you'll need to get started playing D&D is some people to play with. And that leads us on to part 3 of the video. How do you find a group? If you are planning to play online and are happy to start a game with strangers, I'll leave a link in the description to the D&D Compendium site, which has a bunch of different links to places like Reddit and Discord, where there are communities of people just like you looking to start up a new game. But if you want to play in person, you can either check out any gaming groups via your local gaming store, or you can try and convince some of your friends, co-workers or family members to play. The most important thing to remember when bringing together a group of new players is to work out who is going to be the Dungeon Master. Ideally, this would be whoever in the group has the most experience with other TTRPGs or has actually played D&D before. But that doesn't have to be the case. You can have all the new players and a new DM all learn the game together at the same time. That's how a lot of groups start out. You will also want to think about how many players you are going to have in your group. 3 to 6 players plus the Dungeon Master is a fairly normal group size, and you wouldn't want to go any larger than this. It can make the game too difficult to manage, especially for new players or a new DM. But ideally, 4 to 5 players plus the DM is the sweet spot for a D&D group size. The last thing to cover here is the game version. Every few years, D&D comes out with a new set of rules and a new set of core books. Currently, we are in D&D 5th edition, or 5e as it's usually called. However, from September 2024, Wizards of the Coast, the D&D publisher, are going to start releasing new versions of the Player's Handbook, followed by the Dungeon Master's Guide, and then eventually in 2025, a new Monster Manual. This new version of D&D is called 1D&D at the moment, as it's still in development, although it may have a different name on release. So if you are thinking about buying those core rulebooks, depending on what time we are watching this video, maybe consider waiting a little until the new books are released. Or perhaps use those new releases as an opportunity to buy the older 5th edition books, as they'll probably come down a bit in price. Either way, it doesn't matter too much which version you're playing, as long as everyone in your group is following the same rules for the same version. That being said, for a group of new players, the latest, most up-to-date rule set is probably going to be the one that is the easiest to get into and will have the most support and advice available online. Hopefully this video has helped you to decide whether you want to start playing D&D, and if so, where to begin. And maybe it's inspired you to think about taking on that mantle of the Dungeon Master. If you want to get more of a feel for how the game runs, you could try watching some web series campaigns on YouTube, things like Critical Role and Dimension 20, to get an idea for what a game session can be like when it's run. I'll leave some links to those in the description below. Thank you all for watching. If you've learned something from this one, remember to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel, Nazir North, for more D&D content and advice for players and dungeon masters. If you are new to D&D and you still have questions after watching this video, leave a comment below and I'll do my best to help you out. Cheers everyone, thanks for watching, I'll see you next time.